Welcome to this National Press Foundation Google Plus Hangout. I apologize for the technical problems we had this morning. I hope that you've all managed to find us at our new location online. I'm Linda Topping-Streitfeld. I'm the Director of Programs for the National Press Foundation. For those who don't know us, we are a nonprofit. We're based here in Washington, D.C., and our mission is to improve the work of journalists, especially around complex topics. And we're very happy this morning to be here with Vanessa Schneider. She is Google's Geo Media Program Manager, and she's going to talk to us about a tool that Google has launched recently, which is going to help journalists who are covering violent weather events and other crisis situations. So this fits right in with our mission to help journalists in the work that they do. Vanessa, it's great to be here with you this morning.
Thank you so much.
I'm going to let you take it away.
Okay, great. I'm just going to flip up a presentation I'd like to share with you guys. Let's see here. Before we get started. Okay, great. Can you see that okay over there?
I don't see it on my end. I still see you.
Oh, you don't see it. Let's see here. Let me try closing out of this. I'll screen share another way.
Now I see it.
Perfect. Okay.
And it looks pretty scary.
And it looks pretty yes, that's true. That's not the friendliest slide to start it on. Okay. Okay, so thank you for the intro. My name's Vanessa Schneider, and I work on the Google Maps and the Google Earth team, and I'm based at Google's headquarters in Mountain View, California. And my focus is actually on teaching journalists how to get the most out of the many mapping tools that we have available to you guys so that you can build very compelling visualizations for your stories. So today I'm actually just focusing on just a few of our tools, and I'm representing Google's crisis response team. And we actually have members of this team based in New York, in Sydney, Australia, California, and also we have many Googlers across the world who kind of help us in times of these natural disasters. And just for some background, if you're unfamiliar, crisis response is actually a project based out of google.org, which is it's the charitable arm of Google. And the team really focuses on making critical information more accessible in times of disaster. And so really with all the things that make Google great, like our technology and the scale that we have for our products. And oh, one second. Actually, can you guys mute on your end? Can you just mute the your broadcast or your button, your sound button? Should be at the top of the screen. Then it'll just stop flipping the sound back and forth. Anyway, I'll keep going. Anyway, so with all the things that make Google great, we really think that the crisis response team is really well positioned to make an impact during these times of crisis, and just in terms of connecting affected people on the ground with the emergency information that's so crucial to helping them. All right, so over the next few minutes, I am going to be talking to you. I'm just trying to see if my slide flipped over. Is there a delay on my slides? Looks like my screen is frozen. Hang on a second. Let me close out of this. Let me go back into this. Okay, great. So here's a breakdown of what I'll be covering during the next few minutes of this webinar. I'll be talking about the crisis response team and the tools that we use, as well as I wanted to take just a few minutes to focus on our response during Hurricane Sandy, which I think is a really kind of fascinating case study in and of itself. And I also wanted to talk to you, of course, about the tools that we provide that you can really use in your, during times of crisis and when you're covering natural disasters yourselves. Okay, so again, first I want to just talk a little bit about, who the Google Crisis Response Team is. So as I mentioned, Google's really committed to using our assets and resources for doing good. So we're really focusing on making critical information more accessible in times of disaster. So we know that the internet is mostly reliable, pretty reliable during disasters. Here's actually a chart from 2010 when an earthquake hit Chile. And you'll notice how search traffic immediately picked up after the earthquake struck. It's also important to note that during these times, other lines of communication are often down. So, local servers. So here you're seeing folks couldn't access their email, phone SMS. So again, going back to that theme that, the internet's really reliable during this time. And we also noticed that before a potential disaster, both before a disaster and during and after a disaster, we see huge spikes in related search traffic, probably not surprisingly. And here is actually a chart. We're seeing spikes for the earthquake in Chile, which I just mentioned, as well as the earthquake in Japan in 2011. So based on our experiences and just user experience research that we've done, but also because of the really great insights from authoritative responders that we work with, we've identified some core information needs during a disaster, which in this context is not just relevant for the work that we do or the work of emergency responders, but it's also really interesting to kind of look at this if you're trying to figure out, what kind of stories to cover and information that you want to provide in your coverage. So based on all these insights that I have listed here, we've really focused on authoritative information about what's happening in real time, again, for the benefit of affected people on the ground. So how do we make this information available? So there's a few ways, and we use tools that we've developed specifically for our responses. And here you see a few of them listed: Public Alerts, Person Finder, and the Crisis Map. And I'm going to briefly touch on each of these tools right now and tell you a little bit about them. And then I'm going to talk to you more about how you can use each of these in just a few minutes. So the first tool that I listed was Public Alerts. And if you're not familiar, Public Alerts is the tool that we use to surface emergency information to users from authoritative sources such as the USGS, for one, and from NOAA, when and where we think this information is relevant. So Public Alerts are, as you can see here, they're available via Google Now, Google Maps for mobile, and Google Web Search. And we make some of the data that we get during a response, some of the emergency information that we collect through our authoritative sources, we make them available here via this tool, via Public Alerts. And maybe some of you have actually seen these before and hopefully found them useful to you. And Person Finder, you might have heard of this one too. It's a tool really that's about connecting people in the aftermath of a disaster and making the information, easily shareable across different instances of related kind of Person Finder-esque tools, how I say it. So for instance, for the Haiti earthquake in January 2010, we first created, that's actually when we first created Person Finder, because we saw that a bunch of different websites had their own type of person finder live, including the Department of State, various media outlets, NGOs, and many others. But none of these applications really talk to one another, or so we found. So we built Person Finder, and actually and a related API that really allowed others to access the data that we were collecting via our Person Finder. And and this data, we made it in a common standard, again, just to make sharing across all of these Person Finder instances more easier to do. So we could essentially collect one database of names, which we thought was really important for conveying that information. So here's actually what you're looking at is an instance that we launched during the recent Boston Marathon bombings, and a few people wrote about it, so you might have seen it. But yeah, that would be the most recent time that we've used Person Finder. So moving on to the last tool, this is what we call the crisis map. So it's the team's primary vehicle, essentially for visualizing and disseminating crisis-related geographic data. So things like weather information, shelter locations, evacuation zones, satellite imagery that that our partners might collect immediately after a disaster. All kinds of stuff that we think people in affected areas would find useful. And what you're looking at here is, we call it our Weather Hazards Emergency Preparedness Map. This is actually just kind of a default weather map that we always have live and available for you to check out. If you're in your browser right now and able to do so, you can go to google.org/crisismap, and it should default to this view. And you'll see along the right we have the map title and the description. We have a bunch of layers of information that you can check on and you can check off. We also, under each layer of information, we let you know where that source of information comes from and link to the site. Sometimes we even give you a link to download that layer of information. So it's constantly changing, and I definitely encourage you to explore that. You can also, I did also want to point out that in the top right corner of this map, right next to the map title, it's kind of small and hard to see, but there's a little arrow button, and if you click on that, that pulls down a drop-down menu of sort of recent crisis maps that we've made and ones that we're currently maintaining. So if you're looking at it right now, you can kind of check that out, and you'll see that we have a few other maps listed. So if you ever were curious what we might be working on, you can always feel free to check out that feature. Okay. So here's a recent crisis map that we created and launched during the recent tornado in Oklahoma. So if you can kind of see it here in my screenshot, we listed a bunch of different information from various sources. We had shelter information, we had school and church closings, and here you can actually see that the line across the map is the path of the tornado, so we had even put it on that. And just kind of as a little side note, tangential, the BBC had actually built an infographic of the area, kind of pointing out different parts about it, and they actually had mapped the path of the tornado and said that they had used the crisis map as a reference for their infographic. And we're going to get into more about how you can use this map later in the presentation, but I just thought it was like a neat use case for it, sort of as research, again, as a resource of information for you to use. So here's another view of our Oklahoma map, crisis map. We actually, just a few days after the the tornado hit, we were able to, our partners at Digital Globe, they were able to collect satellite imagery of the area after the tornado. So here what you're looking at is imagery that we've overlaid onto the map. It was collected May 22nd, again by Digital Globe. And this is, the view is that you're looking at of Briarwood Elementary School. And you can actually use the, on the bottom right corner, you can see, you can actually use a little slider bar on the map. So if you toggle that and just drag it back and forth, it actually changes the opacity of the imagery. So it will flip it to the before imagery, so you can actually see that before and after effect. And again, just another view, just to show you how, you know, the information again that we overlay. This is just another shot of our satellite imagery. And this is of Moore Medical Center, again collected May 22nd by Digital Globe. But over along the right, you can see that we have different types of imagery we collected from different sources on. It looks like the same date there, but just more information available to check out. And
Vanessa,
if you go to, yes.
These are great slides. Is it possible for you to maximize them in some way to show them full screen? It would be great if we could see them a little bit bigger.
Let me see here. Did that make it bigger?
It did get a little bit bigger.
Okay, I think that's.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, sorry about that. I think that's as big as it's going to go.
Okay, thanks.
But if something's unclear, certainly, and if anyone has a question that's unclear, I can try to verbally describe what's in the slide.
Great.
So I just showed you our weather map and our Oklahoma map, but we don't just respond to disasters happening in the U.S., we're also responding to incidents abroad. So I always get a lot of questions, you know, whether we're just U.S. focused. So I just wanted to show just a couple more examples of some maps that we've launched in the past for specific incidents. The top left map is actually of some recent flooding in Jakarta. And what you're seeing there is, I think that the blue dots are areas of flooding, and then we also overlaid our traffic information on top of it. And then the bottom left map is from the earthquake in Chile that I mentioned in 2010. And again, we just had, you know, just spots most affected by the earthquake just mapped out. And then in the top right, you'll see we have a map. I think that was the recent storm in the Philippines, and so we're mapping different areas of shelter locations there, as well as the path of the storm. So, you know, another piece of this is that, you know, I'm talking about all this data that we're kind of collecting and kind of making a mashup here on the map. So we're constantly working with data providers, you know, both during a disaster, you know, in an affected area, so folks on the ground who are actively working that area, but also, you know, in quiet times when we're not, you know, actively responding to an incident. And so we're working with these data providers to really help them get their important data and information out to the public. And so here, this is actually a crisis map that we created in collaboration with the Florida Division of Emergency Management. And you can see along the right that some of the layers of information include, you know, evacuation zones and routes around Florida, surge zones, and much more. And you can actually, you know, we list on the top right, you know, the link to the Florida Division of Emergency Management's website, so that users can learn more information and see more information that they have. So that's just to give you a quick overview of the tools that we've developed for these responses. And now I thought it would be interesting to take a closer look at a recent response that I'm sure, you know, to the folks listening out there, it's probably pretty relevant since you likely had coverage about it. And so I just kind of wanted to briefly talk for a few minutes about how, we responded to Hurricane Sandy. So, October 25th, Hurricane Sandy hit the Bahamas, and its forecasted path had it heading towards the East Coast. So first, I hadn't mentioned this before, but I always get this question, how do we decide when we're going to get involved, when we're going to share information? And I have to say that there's a lot of criteria. Again, it's a small team, and we try to do everything that we can where we think will be valuable. But it's sort of a big piece of criteria is, whether something is expected to, say, affect a major population center, and we look at the size of that population. And of course, this is all dependent on the availability of information that we think will be useful. So if we don't have anything really useful to share, we likely will not respond. But in the case of Sandy, obviously, all eyes were on its path. So we launched a new crisis map just for Sandy. And in the case of our Sandy map, we had information like evacuation routes, and we got those from FEMA. We had shelter information sourced by the American Red Cross. And we also had, weather data from NOAA and the National Hurricane Center. We actually, had a ton of information flying around, but that's kind of some of the highlights of it. And then October 28th, mandatory evacuations were ordered in parts of New York City and New Jersey, including Atlantic City. And so with a large population at risk, we launched a second crisis map just specific to the New York City area, just to kind of separate. We had a lot of information going, so we felt it was of interest to users just to kind of focus the area on the map even more. And so this map included New York City specific evacuation zones and shelters sourced from city and state agencies. And we also had layers to help improve, what we call situational awareness. So we had webcams and a curated feed of YouTube videos, and those were curated by our friends at Storyful, which if you don't know much about that organization, they're great, and I encourage you to Google them and check them out again. That's Storyful. And so we also made those videos that they curated for us available on the YouTube homepage. So again, trying to use kind of all of our means to broadcast this information. So just to highlight, the maps I just showed you. So we had 2 Sandy maps, and we had 50+ layers of information. So again, just a ton of information, shelters, power information, where you could get gas, where you could go and you can charge up at a gas station. We had we were updating our transit information because obviously buses and subways, everything was on hold there. So we were trying to, that was crucial information, for people to know about. And we also, build these maps, for any of the data geeks who might be listening, we use a lot of different formats. And we, data comes in many formats. So our crisis map can handle ingest many different formats. And those are just a few of them there. Basically, it was an around-the-clock effort. The team stayed up 24 hours and just constantly updating the map with new relevant information. And, and we definitely saw a lot of usage, and I'll show that, a slide on that in a second, actually. I mentioned public alerts before. So again, public alerts is that tool that we use to surface emergency information, again, from those authoritative sources that we're working with. During Sandy, users saw alerts, this is just one typical one. So again, this is tropical storm warning. So that's kind of what the alert looks like. And then we also surfaced high wind and coastal flood warnings. And so this one's just the tropical storm warning, but we were showing a bunch of different information, and again, surfacing it across Google Search, Google Maps for mobile, Google Now, everywhere we think that our users are kind of looking up information. And so on the evening of October 29th, Sandy made landfall, and it brought strong winds and a historically high storm surge, and it caused, as we know, widespread damage. And in the New York metropolitan area, just 2.5 million people were without power, which is a huge number of people. In the recovery phase, the team focused on the needs of those affected. So what, information do they really need? So again, like I mentioned, the transportation information with updated scheduling, power information, food banks, etc. And then in addition to, that kind of information, during the days following Sandy, we partnered with NOAA and the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency to publish 601 square miles of aerial imagery of the affected areas. So here what you're looking at, and I'm sorry I can't make it bigger, it's a shot of Brick Township, New Jersey, and the after shot on the right was collected October 31st. And then the before shot was just older imagery that we had, older satellite imagery that we had of the same area in September 2010. So we tried to get, and again, this imagery, we overlaid it onto our crisis map so you could access it from there. I just want to show you just a couple more views of some of the imagery because it's just really striking and it's really fascinating. Here you're looking at Mantoloking, New Jersey. So again, the before shot is September 2010, and then after is October 31st. And here's just one more before and after view. This is a Staten Island. The before shot was collected in 2012, not too long before the hurricane. And then this is the after shot of Staten Island, collected November 2nd. So this one's particularly fascinating with the boats and now up on land. It's just we looked through the satellite imagery and we saw all kinds of stuff like this. During Sandy, we also saw the media play a really big role in getting our maps, to a broad audience. Here's just some of the uses that we saw of our maps, and I'll talk more in a second about how you can use our tools in your coverage. But I just thought it was, worth throwing it out there that, we really find that during these times, people are, they're certainly finding the information through Google search and all of that, but these, the media helping to get the word out to these affected people on the ground is one huge way of getting that information to the right folks. So we talked a little bit about the tools that we launched in response. Now I just wanted to talk briefly about some of the numbers that we saw. On October 29th, when I mentioned that Sandy made landfall in New York City, our map saw a huge spike in traffic. And just to give you some breakdown of those numbers, 10% of these were mobile users, which I'll mention again in a moment. And almost 20% of the overall map traffic was from New York and New Jersey. And this is a really interesting number. 82% of this traffic was in the non-Google referral category. So in other words, external sites embedding our crisis map, so news sites and just third-party sites, sharing the map, that really helped to draw traffic to it, and again, to get this information out, to a broader audience. So, I mentioned we saw lots of traffic and we heard lots of, nice things from the press, but, the feedback that obviously was really mattered to us and was really the most important is whether, the information that we were making available was really, making a difference, was really helping people. And, these are just a few of the quotes that we collected. We actually added a link to our crisis map just to collect feedback, what information is missing for you, what do you want to see, what would be helpful for you, and we got a lot of really interesting responses, but also just a lot of thank yous, and it was really great to see that affected users were really making, getting informed information, getting information and making, better informed decisions with that information, both before and after Sandy. Okay, so in developing the crisis map, we've learned a whole lot, as you can imagine. And many of you out there listening may already be mapping disasters. I mean, that's one, huge area of coverage for media outlets. So I thought it would be interesting to kind of just briefly share some of the lessons that we've learned along the way, that it might be useful in your own work as you're building your own maps. And let's dive into those right now. So, and some of this might be obvious to you, and some of the things that you might have learned. I'm going to points 3 and 4. I'm going to actually most of these points, I'm going to flip to the next slide that will inform that. In a disaster, we often see geographic data spread across the web in viewing frames that often just aren't suitable or usable, just by a lay audience, and they might not be mobile compatible, or they just don't allow other data to be shown within, the same context. So for instance, it's useful for someone affected to see a list of shelters. As I've mentioned, we've overlaid shelter information, say, from the Red Cross, but also see, evacuation routes from a FEMA, but also maybe traffic incidents, warnings from a local Department of Transportation. Just a few more examples, just, again, lots of great geographic data on the web, but again, showing, each of those pieces together in a way that works for all users, so it's easy to use, easy to navigate, and to really understand the information. That's really what we built the crisis map for, and what we're continuing to try to solve, because it's such a challenging task, but that's sort of what the crisis map team is working to do. So here's a sample crisis map from, we launched one for Hurricane Isaac in late August 2012. And so this is what you're seeing there. It looks kind of funky at first look, but we were taking recently flown NOAA imagery, and we overlaid it onto the crisis map. So we made it available to our users without any special software. You could go in any browser, your mobile phones, and check this out. And we put it side by side with other, relevant hurricane layers of information, including things like damage reports in the area, just all types of stuff. And you can see here on the map that we also often under the map title and the map description, we often link off to other really great resources for information. Just again, so you can know, who are the folks I need to be checking in with for that information too.
Vanessa, can I ask you, can you go back to the previous slide for a minute, please?
Sure.
It's not clear to me from this view what we're actually seeing. It looks like, I can't tell.
Looks weird.
Yeah. What part of the country are we in, and what's the significance of the dark areas?
Yeah, so we're looking at the Gulf Coast for Hurricane Isaac, and those areas are just strips of satellite imagery that we've overlaid onto the map.
And what can I see from those strips of imagery?
You can see flooding and damage in the area. So this is just a zoomed out view, because I was trying to kind of show just how we kind of overlaid, because the plane will fly over those areas, so we only get, certain pieces of imagery. So now it's not satellite imagery, but go ahead.
So you're saying that in real time, if I were looking at this, I could zoom in and see a lot of detail in the those darker areas.
Right, exactly. I mean, it's just a captured moment, so it's not a real-time shot of that area, but it's just we've worked with, again, with NOAA. They flew planes along the coast, and they gave that imagery to us, and then we processed that. So yes, you could actually zoom in very close, and again see flooding areas, damage areas, and kind of just zoom and pan around that imagery. And it looks, and we actually, along the right, we've listed the dates when it was collected. So they were collecting imagery September 3rd, September 2nd, September 1st. So they were collecting new imagery every day, it looks like. And you can uncheck, there's little check boxes, you can uncheck those layers and just see certain days of it. But yeah, that's exactly what you'd be seeing.
Got it. Okay, and while I've interrupted you anyway, let me ask a question from one viewer who wants to some quick clarification on how to sign up for public alerts.
So you don't really sign up for, actually, if you go to, so you don't really sign up for them. You can go to google.org/public alerts, and you can check out, the public alerts we just have streaming and available. And I'll flip up that link again in a second. But we really surface it, when, we know you're searching for certain keywords, or when we know you're, geographically in near affected areas. So we're trying to surface it when we think it's relevant to your search queries. So that's kind of how you find them. But you can always see the ones that we have available at google.org/public alerts.
So when you say you surface it, does that mean if I'm in the area of a hurricane warning, for example, I'm going to just get an alert on my phone or on my device? In
your searches. So in your Google, if you're just searching on google.com, you'll see it. If you're in Google Maps for mobile, if you're looking at that app, it will surface in that when you're doing searches.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And again, if you go to google.org/public alerts for the person who asked that question, it shows you some more information just about it. I know I kind of went over quickly what it is. All right. So, I mentioned that we're kind of going through lessons learned here. Just a few more. I think, the mobile first point it might be an obvious point, but it's worth going over that. It's super important to make sure that the mobile experience, is working and works well, because obviously users, in affected areas are, might be without power, but they have their phones, and so they can access information that way. So we're actually, constantly working to sort of optimize the crisis map for that mobile experience, because we know that's, again, I mentioned the numbers before, where I think it was 10 or 20% of users were coming to our map during Sandy for, via their mobile. So again, we're constantly trying to update that experience and make sure it's easy for users to find that information. And here's I just wanted to show a shot of what it looks like on mobile. So we don't actually have a separate app for the crisis map, but you can see here that, if you're just in your phone's browser app, for instance, it kind of scales gracefully across each of those views, for different sizes, across desktop, and here it's Android and iOS views. And then if you can see here, you can actually, click on the layers button, and that will open up information for whoever's using it, and then they can kind of click around and explore the information that we have available. Okay, so now let's get into how you guys can use these tools, and also, and I definitely want to save a couple minutes to take your questions. So I do want to say that I think that these tools are really optimized for the digital use case. So, for you guys working on the web out there. But I did want to mention that we're really open to talking more with television and radio journalists, just to see how, the work that we're doing can really be helpful in those formats for your coverage, through those formats. So, and I'll flip up my email at the end of this, but feel free to email me that feedback anytime. And my email is actually mediatools@google.com. But again, I'll flip that up at the end. Again, just really open. I just wanted to say that before we jumped into the tools. Okay, so let's dive into it. So we know in times of crisis that people aren't just turning to Google for disaster information, like I mentioned earlier, but they're really also turning to their trusted news sources, as we've seen, because we're seeing so many referrals from news sites out there. So we think that the tools and information that we provide as supplements to your coverage can really give your readers additional actionable information. So the biggest use of our tools that we see is news outlets just embedding our crisis maps. And you can easily do this by just going to the share button at the top of the crisis map. And if you're on there right now, I encourage you to try it out. But that share button, which you can see here in the screenshot, that opens a pop-up window with just a few different options. You can, share the map with your social networks, as you can see the share buttons there. But you also get a URL to the map, as well as just a short snippet of HTML, and that's what you can use to embed the map on your website. And if you can kind of squint and see it, in that HTML snippet, you can also customize the height and width. So right at the beginning of the code, you can see that. So in the layers panel on the crisis map, and I mentioned this briefly before, you'll notice that there are checkboxes next to each layer. So you can check them on and off to add or remove layers of information on the map. We often have a lot of layers of information, so a map can look quite busy with all the information turned on and onto the map. And I did want to mention that whatever layers you have checked on, so whatever you're looking at in the map viewport, that's the view you'll be sharing when you grab the URL and the HTML for embedding the map onto your site. So this is really great if, say, you only want to tell a certain piece of the story. Maybe you're only telling the shelter story or the evacuation story, or you just want to display our satellite imagery, which in this case, just flipping ahead, is what weather.com did. So they took our map, and you can see here they just embedded it on their site. And when you embed it, that creates, your users can interact with it, which is really great. So instead of just taking a screenshot, I would encourage you guys to embed this if you can, just because, again, it creates an interactive experience for your users, and they can start exploring the information in the layers panel as well, and they can start, kind of seeing what's available there. So again, this is just a good kind of example of what it looks like when you embed, but you can change, again, that height and width depending on the column spaces that you're working with. And here's just a screenshot of how AOL.com embedded the crisis map during Hurricane Sandy. And it's worth mentioning that our crisis maps are, extremely reliable. So they're built on Google's infrastructure to sustain any amount of traffic that you might be dealing with on your site. In fact, that's one of the, I mentioned that I teach journalists, around the world how to use our mapping tools, in their stories, and that's what I often stress is being one of the great things about using Google's mapping tools in general, is just that scalability and that reliability. So the AOL homepage here likely gets a ton of traffic, and we're able to sustain that volume and make sure that that Sandy map that they've embedded stays up and is available to their readers, which is obviously a really crucial part of this, since that information is so important to the people looking it up. So I did want to mention that we have a couple options for customizing the layout of the crisis map. We know, you guys always like to have a little bit of custom options out there. And here you can actually see, so again, we're going back to our Oklahoma map. And I showed how weather.com embedded it. So they've basically embedded this view where you have the layers panel visible on the right. And again, they can, your reader can interact with the map. But then you can also just get rid of that layers panel with just a little snippet of code that I've listed here. If you wanted to make a note of it, but you can also feel free to email me at mediatools@Google if you're playing around with it and want to remember this. But you can get rid of that layers panel and simply do what we call button mode, and that's kind of the mobile look that I just showed you. It kind of just cleans it up and just kind of focuses on one piece of information. And this is what you're looking at is just sort of various information on sort of like affected areas along the tornado path, so different damage counts and information. And again, we just give a couple options to do this, but if you ever have any ideas, or you're like, it'd be great if I could customize the map like this, we're really, really interested again to hear from journalists about what they would find really useful for like layouts and styling and that kind of stuff. So absolutely feel free to reach out anytime if you have an idea on that. And for the developers that might be listening to this webinar, we've actually open sourced the code that we use to power our crisis maps. So you can actually modify and build your own crisis maps, basically. And if you go to this link, googlecrisismap.googlecode.com, you can check out that source code. And also on this site, we have example code that shows you how to import data in different formats. I mentioned that the crisis map allows you to kind of pull in different data formats. And so this site actually tells you how to do that very easily if you're working with a lot of sources. And I also wanted to mention that we're actually running a beta tester program where we're working with select partners to create, and we're helping them create and publish their own sort of rich map mashups for crisis. We're focusing it on crisis, humanitarian, and nonprofit uses. And again, these maps are all hosted on Google's infrastructure. So the information is hosted in the cloud, on our servers. I just want to show an example of one of our beta testers. His name's Fabrice, and he's a GIS specialist. And he has a big passion for making this kind of emergency data available, just like we're doing on our other crisis maps. So his map here that you're looking at, this is a map of relevant information for the 2013 hurricane season, which is underway. So he has information from NOAA and various other sources, and he's localized it just for the Caribbean countries, which is really great. And that's just his tweet announcing the map. But broadly, we're currently working with states and other, kind of emergency organizations in high-risk areas, particularly for the hurricane and wildfire season that's just started. And we're using the crisis map to get their preparedness and emergency-related geodata online and into the hands of all users. So they're building maps that look similar to our own crisis maps, and they're able to, again, easily convey and display that information. And I said it's a beta tester program, so it's not quite public yet. But if you're really interested in kind of how can your organization start using this tool and building your own kinds of crisis maps, we're definitely interested in talking to you. And again, just feel free to email me at mediatools@google.com. All right. So I mentioned that we've built an API to allow easy sharing of our person finder database. And one way we're encouraging the collection of that sort of one canon database of information is by making the person finder embeddable on your website. So if you just go to google.org/personfinder, on that site we actually We have information for emergency responders, but also for developers. And in each of those sections, we provide just a short snippet, again, of HTML, just like you see on the crisis map. And so it's kind of a standard snippet. And for each person finder instance, you can see there I've highlighted the word repository. We actually just have a new name for each person finder instance so that you're pointing to the correct one and embedding the correct one. But when we're responding and we have a person finder live, we will make that clear to you, so you know how to kind of finish up the code and embed that. And this is what the person finder you're looking at is from the recent earthquake in Sichuan, China. And in terms of using public alerts, if you wanted to add public alerts to your website, and we encourage you to do so. And again, these are the same alerts that I mentioned, surface across all of our Google apps and search information. You can actually subscribe to our public alerts feed that we make available. And again, if you just go to google.org/public alerts, you can see the types of alert information we make available. And so if you just if you go to this link here, alert-hub.appspot.com, that's actually how you can make how you can pull in that feed of public alerts onto your website. So that's it for the tools. I wanted to mention, the question is always, how do you find out about when we're responding, we're making tools available for media use? So we actually announce our responses via all the usual channels. We have a google.org blog, via the Google Maps blog, via Google's various social media channels. So if you're following us on Twitter or Google+, for instance. But we also maintain a mailing list aimed just at journalists and producers interested in learning about Google Maps and all Google Maps and Google Earth news. So across digital, across print, across broadcast. Content includes the launch of new crisis maps, when we make fresh satellite imagery available for your use in relevant news stories, product news, of special interest to journalists, and more. But if you just go to this bit.ly link and apply to join the Google group, you can actually check out some of our past alerts and kind of just get a sense of what we send out. And here's one actually I sent, maybe that was last week, for Tropical Storm Andrea. We had launched a crisis map for that. So I send around the links and let you know how to access it, how to customize it for your website. I send all that information. And we just send a few emails a month just to make sure we're keeping things relevant and not spamming you guys. This is kind of the communication tool we use in Geo to kind of let you guys know what assets are available for you guys to use in your coverage. And we also, we have the mailing list, but we also maintain our Google Plus page just for media professionals who are interested in news across all of Google's tools that they might want to take advantage of, whether it's search or Hangouts, of course Geo. And here what you're looking at is a bunch of kind of crisis map related posts that I put up. So the things that we announce via the mailing list, we also announce via our Google Plus page. If you like to follow that and check that out too. And finally, before we might get to a couple questions, I just wanted to again flip up my contact information. Please feel free to send feedback anytime with questions, and just some of the links again to the tools that I discussed today. And I threw in a permissions link, google.com/permissions. I often get questions about, what can, journalists do with our maps? Does it cost anything? And that site actually answers all of those questions and more. But if anything's ever unclear, of course, just media tools at google.com if you'd like us to clarify.
Fabulous. Vanessa, thank you so much. This is really useful.
Yeah, absolutely.
So here's a question, and I'm sure you answered this at some point in your presentation, but just for clarification.
Sure.
If I am a news organization in a local area and we're having a crisis that may be a relatively small or localized crisis, your Google team has not responded, can we use the basic map and incorporate our own information? Can we link to our own local emergency sources or somehow put information from our own reporting into that map?
Yeah, so that's kind of the beta tester program I mentioned. If you're interested in joining that and kind of wanting to check out our crisis mapping tool and testing that, it's just not ready for public prime time quite yet, but I definitely encourage you to email us if you're interested in that. But there are other ways to overlay your information. We have a tool called My Maps, which you just access via the Google Maps homepage. Easy, basic kind of mapping tool. You can plot different points on it. We actually have a new tool that's kind of similar to My Maps, kind of an upgraded experience. It's called Maps Engine Lite. If you Google it, you can check it out. It's a very new tool that we have. Again, same idea, just kind of customize a really nice looking map. So I would encourage, going that route. But if you're if you're working with a lot of different data formats and you really want to build that mashup that we do, definitely email me and we can talk about that.
And it sounds like, based on some of your explanations, that there is some knowledge of HTML required to do more than the very basic work with these maps. Can you talk about how much knowledge you might need and how much help is available from Google if I'm a beginner but I want to do some of this?
Yeah, so in terms of just embedding our crisis map, we try to make it as simple as possible with just that little snippet of HTML. So you don't actually have to do any coding, you don't have to generate any code. We try to make that as simple as possible for you to just copy and paste and drop it into the HTML for your web page. And if you ever have any trouble with that, you're talking about, what resources are available. That's my full-time job is here to support you in your mapping efforts. So always feel free to email us anytime. In terms of the public alerts feed, the person finder, I think you do just need a little bit more knowledge. But if you're, if you have a developer on staff or if you ever have any questions about that, again, just email us and we can kind of walk you through the steps for that. But we're constantly trying to make it easier for you to use these tools so that you don't really have to do a lot of development work. But sometimes development work is required to get that end goal.
Right. I was interested early on in the presentation when you were showing the before and after satellite maps. And I think there was even a testimonial from someone who said, I wondered what happened to my house. I can see it now on your map. So, and that's a fantastic tool, especially when after a disaster, it may be days before someone is able to get back to their house. And I know this is the case when a lot of times in the big fires out west, which I guess we're having right now in Colorado, and we've had a lot of that this season. So the question is, how soon can that data be made available? And yeah, how comprehensive is it, and how quickly after a disaster could I go on to your site and try to find what's left of my property?
Yeah, so in a crisis situation, we sort of, as soon as we're responding, that's when we're starting to work with our partners to see if collecting new imagery is available. And often, a digital globe, when a big thing like Sandy's happening, sort of everyone's requesting that imagery, so they are kind of working in overdrive to try to make that available. So hopefully just within the days after an incident happens, and then we kind of work around the clock to ingest that and overlay that onto the map, make it available. But as soon, you can certainly keep checking back to the map, but again, as soon as we know you guys are looking for that imagery, as soon as we have it available, I email the mailing list, and I say, heads up, this is live, here you go, here's all the ways to access it, all the ways to use it, across television, across websites, across print, if you just want to take a screenshot of it. Yeah, so we definitely, it's hard to give a time frame for it, but certainly just in the days post an incident.
Right. Do you ever actively partner with the major news organizations in an area? I'm thinking of instances where a reporter in Oklahoma might know that a particular evacuation route is blocked because there's a huge tree that's fallen across the road. Do you have some partnership or method by which they can give you that information and get it onto the map?
So I don't know if we've ever done anything like that in the past. We've definitely crowdsourced information. In the case of Hurricane Sandy, we would actually, short answer is we would love to talk to you if you have that information and figure out a way to get that onto our map. Yeah.
And a kind of related question, has Google considered, or maybe you have this somewhere, a feature whereby during a crisis you could set up not just a map, but a chat where people who were victims of the crisis or involved or had knowledge in some way could just have a chat or a blog that they could put in information, new things they find out that might be useful to others?
We Not so much a chat, really. I mean, if users were interested in kind of starting that up themselves, I mean, we have features within Google Plus, for instance. We have a communities feature where people can kind of try to collect information and gather that up. But we don't really have a real-time chat or community board that we make public, just the tools that I showed you.
Okay. I don't see any more questions from viewers. We've given people a couple of opportunities to weigh in, and I think that we've about exhausted it. So we're about to sign off. I want to let everybody out there know that by tomorrow we hope to have a recorded version of this embedded on our website also, and you can find that at nationalpress.org. If you need to review it or you want to share it with a friend, that would be a great place to do it. And I want to thank Vanessa Schneider for your time today. This has been great. I love this partnership, and I'm looking forward to the next one.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.